This video is the only guide you need if you are preparing for B1 preliminary reading. I'm going to show you general strategies and some tips and tricks for each part of the exam paper. If you like the idea, let's do it. Hi and welcome to Teacher Phil, where I help people like you pass their Cambridge exam. Let's start with a question for you. How much do you know about the B1 preliminary reading test? Think about how many different parts there are and what the different tasks look like. You can pause the video for a few moments if you want to think about it for a little bit. Okay, if you were able to answer the question, then congratulations to you, because most people have no idea about what the tasks look like and they have a lot of problems when they take the exam. Luckily, you are going to be a real expert at the end of this video, because we are going to look at each individual part in detail. And I'm also going to give you some general tips that will help you save time and keep calm during the exam. In B1 preliminary, there are 4 different exam papers that you have to go through one by one in the exam. Reading, writing, listening and speaking. Reading is quite difficult for a lot of students because it is made of 6 parts and you have to read a lot in a pretty short time, and it counts 25% towards your overall grade in the exam. The good thing is that you can use specific strategies and techniques that will help you save time and get higher marks. So first, we are going to look at the different parts individually, and I'm going to show you how to do them right. And after that, you will also learn about more general strategies. In part 1, you get 5 short texts, like notices or messages, which you might find in real life. With each text, you also get 3 sentences, A, B or C, and you have to choose the correct option, which has the same meaning as the text. This is what a question in reading part 1 might look like. You can see that the text is really short, and on the right are your 3 possible options A, B and C. Your task is to decide which statement reflects the meaning of the text, or which of them is a fully true statement. The biggest problem in this task is that the 3 options usually all look like they could be correct, and there is often just one word or a little grammatical twist that makes the option incorrect. That's why the first step should always be to read the text carefully, as well as the 3 sentences, and underline the most important words. This way, it will be easier for you to eliminate the incorrect answers and find the one that's right. But let's try with our example from earlier. The 3 sentences all talk about the age to enter the competition, so we should also look at the text and underline the part that talks about this. Next, we simply compare the information in the text with our 3 possible options, and we choose the option that has the same meaning. You can pause the video for a moment and decide which answer the correct one is. Okay, option A is correct. The text says that people have to be at least 18, which describes the minimum age. Or, as option A says, people over 18 can enter the competition. As option B talks about a maximum age, it can't be correct. Option C mentions an exact age, so anyone who is not 18 can't enter the competition. Again, the text says that 18 is the minimum age and not a precise age, so option C also can't be correct. So in reading part 1, you want to read the text and the possible answers carefully, underline the most important words, and then choose the correct option, which has the same meaning as the text. In part 2, you get the descriptions of 5 different people who all want to do, buy or experience something similar, and you have to match each person to one of 8 possible options. Have a look at an example task. As you can see, there's a lot of reading for you to do, so you need to be prepared and have the right strategy. To make it a little bit easier for us right now, let's only look at a part of the task. Above, you can see a couple of examples from a reading part 2 task. The texts are not very long, but keep in mind that there are a total of 5 people and 8 short texts. So altogether, it is quite a lot to read for you. You have to match the people with the perfect place for each of them. Remember that there are always 3 extra places which you don't need to use. Also, the place has to be perfect for the person, which means that the people have to be able to find everything they want in the place you match them to. The first thing you should do when you get to reading part 2 is to check what exactly the 5 different people want from their perfect place. Read each description very carefully and underline the things that are important to each person. In our example from before, this could look like this. You can see in different colors the 3 things that are important to Jenny and Matt when visiting a city market. It is key for you to find these 3 things for all 5 people in order to be able to complete the task. Otherwise, you will have to simply guess the correct answers, and we definitely don't want that to happen. After analyzing what exactly each of the 5 people want in their perfect city market, we can now look at the 8 different texts and find the perfect option for each person. Start with the first text and see if you can find anything that matches what any of the 5 people want. If you see something, check if the place offers all 3 things that the person wants. Because remember, the place needs to be a perfect fit. In this step, you need to be careful with synonyms and paraphrasing. Synonyms are words that have the same meaning, and paraphrasing means to say the same thing by using different words. For example, he doesn't want to be your boyfriend anymore, and he wants to break up with you. The 2 sentences have the same meaning, but I use different words to express the same idea. You will often find that the words in the descriptions of the people are different from the words in the descriptions of the places. But again, let's look at our example. Here I've underlined the most important information again. And you can see that text F belongs to Jenny, while text G matches Matt. You should also notice that there are a lot of synonyms and paraphrasing. For example, Jenny wants the market to be close to local attractions. In text F, it says the market is close to museums and art galleries, which are local attractions. Part 3 is the first part with 1 longer text. There are also 5 questions with 4 possible answers, A, B, C or D, and you simply have to choose the correct option for each question. As you can see, the last question looks a little bit different from the other 4, but we will get to that in a second. It is always a good idea to start by reading the first 4 questions and underline the most important pieces of information. Then you should read the text quickly and simply highlight the parts in the text where you can find the answers to those questions. Here you can see what this would look like for the first 4 questions of our example task. As a little bit of help for you, remember that the first 4 questions always follow the same order as the information in the text. That means that you can find the answer to the first question first, then the answer to the second question, and so on. After you've done this little bit of preparation, You can then reread the highlighted parts and look for the exact piece of information that gives you the correct answer for each question. In our example, it looks like this. The underlined parts in the text perfectly match the circled options in the questions. Remember, there are 3 steps to answering questions 11 to 14, and it is always the same process. Practice to get faster, and there won't be a problem for you. Question 15 is a little bit different from the other questions, but if you know how it works, it is actually quite easy. As I've told you before, all the other questions follow the same order as the text, and they all ask for pretty detailed information. Question 15, however, asks you about the whole text. You can't just look for one piece of detail that gives you the answer, but instead you have to understand the whole text, the main idea, and what the writer wants to say. In our example, the question asks for a good introduction to the article. This means that you have to understand what the article talks about in order to make that decision. A good way to answer this task is to eliminate the wrong options. They always include something that the text doesn't talk about, or they give you false information. So it is normally quite easy to find the wrong ones. For example, in option A, we see that Peter Fuller never says that mountain biking is more important to him than his career. Option C describes the relationship between mountain biking and Peter's career as an artist. But in the text, he never says that he chose his career only because of the sport. And last but not least, option D says that he gave up art to become as good as possible, which is simply not correct. In fact, he gave up racing because he was afraid of accidents. The only possible answer that is left is option B, and when we look at the information, we see that it describes the text pretty well. So you don't have to be scared of this last question, but you need to be a little bit careful because, after all, it is a little bit different from the other questions in part 3. In part 4, you have to work with a text which has 5 gaps, and you need to choose from 8 options to fill in those gaps. This is what a typical text in part 4 looks like. You can see the 5 gaps where you have to put the missing sentences. Even though there are only 5 gaps in the text, you get 8 possible sentences to choose from. The first step in this task should be to read the text quickly. While you are reading, just write a word or 2 on the side of each paragraph so you know the topic of the different parts of the text. Doing this can help you a lot when you try to match the sentences to the gaps. Once you've read the text, it's time to look at the sentences that you have to put in the gaps. As you can see, I've already underlined the most important words, but the question for you is why they are important. To make a connection between the text and the sentences, you have to find words or expressions in those sentences that are not fully clear. For example, in sentence A, I underlined the word it, because without context, we don't know what it refers to. Underlining these words gives you something like a hook that you can use to connect the sentences to the text. Now we are ready to put the sentences in the gaps. The next step is to look at the text again and go through it one gap at a time. Read very carefully what is around the gap and try to see if you can find some information that connects the text to one of the sentences. In our example text, it could look like this. Right before the gap, the writer explains that he or she was tired of his or her job as a college lecturer. When we now look at our sentence options, there is one that perfectly fits the gap. Sentence G talks about the fact that the writer needed a break. That connects beautifully to the text. in which he or she talks about being tired. So sentence G is our choice. Repeat this for the other gaps and you will complete the task in no time. In part 5, there's a shorter text with 6 gaps. And for each gap, you get 4 possible words to choose from: A, B, C or D. Here you can see an example text. It is not very long with only around 150 words. There are also 6 numbered gaps. You have to put 1 word in each of those gaps. The possible answers look like this. There are always 4 options, A to D, for you to choose from. The first step is not a must, but I definitely recommend reading the text quickly to get a general understanding. Students often forget about the whole text and they focus too much on individual gaps. After you have read the text quickly, it is now time to look at the gaps. Part 5 mainly tests your vocabulary, so it is important to check if we can create any expressions with some of the words before or after the gap. Here is an example. Before the gap, the sentence mentions that coconut trees grow close to the ocean and that there is something hot and wet. There is a lot of ocean in the world, so we are talking about something global and not just local. Here are also the possible answers. It is always a good idea to eliminate 1 or 2 options that just don't work. For example, temperature is impossible because it can't be wet. Weather is also not possible because we never say a weather in English, as weather is an uncountable noun. That leaves us with condition or climate. The word we would use to describe the typical weather in an area is climate, so that is the correct answer. Repeat this process for the other gaps and you'll be just fine. Once you finish all the gaps, it is always a good idea to read the text 1 more time. We often focus too much on the details around each individual gap and we completely forget about the meaning of the whole text. Reading everything again can help you find mistakes that looked correct when you focused very closely on a gap. But in the full context of the topic, you might realize that you actually have to choose a different option. In the last part of the reading test, you again get a short text with 6 gaps and you have to put 1 word in each gap. This is what reading part 6 typically looks like. You can see that the text you have to read is not terribly long, only 100 to 150 words. It looks very similar to part 5, but there are no possible answers to choose from in this task. You need to decide by yourself what the missing words are. The best process in part 6 is very similar to the one in part 5. So I recommend reading the text quickly to get a general understanding of what the writer wants to say and what kind of language we can find. The next step should always be to look at the gaps and to focus around the words that are right before or after them. This will give you useful clues, so you will be able to decide what word is missing in each gap. Focus on the grammatical structures. For example, articles, verb forms, nouns or prepositions. They often tell you what kind of word you have to add in order to make the sentence grammatically correct and meaningful. In this example, I've underlined a few words that can be helpful. You can see that there is a verb in present perfect, I've visited, as well as the noun time. This should tell you that you need to say how often the writer has visited the museum. Of course, there are many ways to express how often something has happened. But in this specific example, there are only 2 words that we can use: every and each. Remember, you can only write 1 word in the gap, so other phrases like the one time I've visited are not possible. As you can see, You need to analyze the gaps very carefully if you want to find the grammatical structures or expressions that help you find the missing words. But with practice, it becomes easier and easier. Once you finish the task, it is a good idea to read the text again, just like in part 5. Don't get too stressed about this part, but if you find a mistake or two, it's already helpful. After looking at each individual task, I'm going to give you a few ideas to help you with your time management as well as your overall strategy going into the exam. Firstly, think about the order of the tasks. In B1 Preliminary, you don't have to go through the tasks from part 1 to part 6 as they are outlined in the exam paper. In fact, you can choose which order you prefer, so you can choose the perfect strategy for you. For example, if you feel that you get tired very quickly, it might be a good idea to leave part 1 until the end of the exam and start with the longer reading tasks, part 3 and part 4. This time you can do those tasks while you are still fresh and go to the shorter texts when you are already a little bit more tired. Another possible way is to start with the grammar and vocabulary tasks, parts 5 and 6, and then do the reading tasks. Or you can do it the other way around as well. These are just a few examples of how to look at the order of the different tasks. But simply make sure that you plan it before you take the exam so you feel more confident on the day. Secondly, you only have 45 minutes to complete the test, which includes transferring all your answers onto a separate answer sheet, which you receive at the beginning of the test. Taking this into account, you are left with around 40 minutes to complete all 6 tasks. When you practice for the exam, you should definitely time yourself to get a better feel for the different tasks. This way you know which ones work a little bit faster for you and which ones are slower. And when you go into the exam, again, you simply feel more confident. And that's it. Thanks a lot for watching until the end. Now you know everything you need about B1 Preliminary Reading. I hope this video makes you feel more prepared. I can also be your teacher. I offer online classes as well as writing feedback. And you can also find articles on my website on all the different parts of the B1 Preliminary Reading test. All the links are in the description box below, and I see you in the next video.